This is ILTV on the hour, bringing you the biggest stories from Israel and the Middle East. I'm Lidar Lazi. It's 2 p.m. Israel time, and today is day 632 of the war in Gaza. Let's get into all the top headlines at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump said he believes it is possible to secure a ceasefire in Gaza within a week. Let's hear what the president had to say.
To a deal in terms of Gaza ceasefire?
Often asked, and I think it's close. I just spoke with some of the people involved. It's a terrible situation that's going Gaza, he's asking about. And we think within the next week we're going to get a ceasefire. And we're supplying, as you know, a lot of money and a lot of food to that area because we have to, you have to. We're in theory not involved in it, but we're involved because people are dying. And I look at those crowds of people that have no food, no anything, and we're the ones that are getting it there. Some of it's being taken by some bad people, once you give it and you give it out, and they're supposed to be taking care of the people, and they end up stealing the food and selling it. But we have.
President Trump made these remarks on Friday to reporters in the Oval Office. The U.S. and Israel believe that the victory over the Islamic Republic of Iran and a potential Gaza ceasefire that would see the return of all the hostages opens a new window of opportunity for peace agreements with Arab states in the region, including Syria and Saudi Arabia. Let's hear what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to say.
והשגנו ניצחון גדול, והניצחון הזה פותח הזדמנות להרחבה דרמטית של הסכמי השלום. אנחנו עובדים על כך במרץ, לצד שחרור חטופינו והכרעת החמאס, יש פה הזדמנות, חלון הזדמנויות שנפתח, ואסור להחמיץ אותו. אסור לבזבז אפילו יום אחד.
And in the wake of the potential historic achievements in the works, President Trump on Saturday night, and for the second time, criticized Israel's prosecutors over the ongoing corruption trial against Netanyahu, which he said was nothing more than a political witch hunt, very similar to the one that he was forced to endure. In a post on his Truth Social, Trump called Netanyahu a war hero and a prime minister who did a fabulous job working with the United States to bring great success in getting rid of the dangerous nuclear threat in Iran. Trump suggested that given the billions of dollars worth of military aid Washington was providing to Israel, it was not going to stand for this. Trump added the trial was a travesty of justice that will interfere with both Iran and Hamas negotiations, and called on the prosecutors to let Bibi go. And now, joining us with more on the war in Gaza is Colonel Olivier Rafowicz, IDF Spokesperson for International Media. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks to you to have me on studio.
So U.S. President Donald Trump, as we just heard, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have expressed a belief that a ceasefire with Hamas and the release of all the hostages could happen within a week. This presents a lot of questions. So first of all, has the IDF really reached its war goals in Gaza?
As you know, we're a democracy, and the army is actually working under the political echelon directives. If there is any change from the government, the Israeli army will, of course, implement the policy decided by the government. For the time being, we are continuing to act against Hamas. At the same time, we are continuing to provide food and whatever is necessary for the population in Gaza.
Which of the war's aims, as directed by the political echelon, does the IDF still have to achieve? And will it be able to do so within the week, assuming that a ceasefire deal is reached?
As you can understand, I can't give any agenda, any timetable concerning the Israeli military operations. Today, as you know, it was mentioned by the Israeli press, there will be a meeting between the Chief of General Staff and the Security Cabinet in Jerusalem, and they will share the results of the last operation, what we call the Chariots of Gideon or Gideon, in the Gaza Strip concerning the goals which have been actually defined by the government and achieved by the military side. Then we will continue to do what we have to do. Like today, we strike many Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip, but we are now waiting for the government to decide what will be the next step.
You know, and at the same time, I have to ask, because we continue to see over 1.5 years into this war that Hamas is still alive and well. We see armed Hamas members jumping on trucks, stealing food, stealing aid. We see them just this week, you know, continuing to threaten and even to murder Gazan civilians. So what is the army's assessment of Hamas's capabilities today?
It is clear that the capabilities, the military capabilities, have been quite clearly diminished by the Israeli activities. We consider that around 25,000 members of Hamas military branch on Jihad Islamic group have been eliminated by our troops during this war against Hamas. But as you know, Hamas was also capable to steal from the humanitarian assistance and resell this assistance to the people in Gaza. We have said that around $600 million have been reached by Hamas by selling this humanitarian assistance, making it possible to reinforce, to reshape its forces. And today there is still forces of Hamas, not like it was the case a year and a half ago, but still it is a threat, and this threat is not over yet.
And so do you foresee a danger in having the army withdraw prematurely from Gaza before it is able to entirely eliminate Hamas and Hamas's capabilities?
It is clear that for the Israeli security interest, Hamas cannot continue to be in any way a military threat in the Gaza Strip, close to our villages, kibbutzim. We saw what happened on 7th of October. In less than 6-7 hours, around 1,300 people have been killed, massacred by the Hamas terrorists. So this thing cannot be repeated. So in any case, what will be the result of the decisions of the process of decision by the government will not include in any way that Hamas continue to be a threat from the Gaza Strip. What will be the way to do it? Let's wait and see what the government will decide for the next steps.
Mm-hmm. And I have, another question in terms of the Judea and Samaria region. Just today, in the last few hours, the IDF has revealed that it has discovered a massive tunnel in Judea and Samaria. We're not talking about Gaza. We know, of course, that in Gaza there's the upper city and the city underground, full of tunnels which the IDF has for the past year and a half been destroying systematically. But in Judea and Samaria, can you maybe comment on what the army has found there and its implications in terms of Israel's security for the future?
What I can tell you now, it is that Hamas has tried and still tries to expand its activities from the Gaza Strip to the Judea and Samaria area, also in Jerusalem. So the Shin Bet, the Shabak, and the army are working very hard in order to thwart these activities from Hamas. We have very clear and very good successes against terror, but war against terror is a long way. It's a long track, and we cannot say we finished the job. Today, it's a big achievement from the Shin Bet mostly. We salute the Shin Bet work and the army working in these parts of the Judea and Samaria, but it is clear that Hamas is not over. The intention to kill Jews is not over, and this war against terror will continue days, months, years, because the intention of this terrorist is still alive.
Colonel Olivier Rafowicz, thank you so much for joining us today and for your insights.
Thank you to you.
And moving on, the war with Iran lasted 12 days. In fact, it's being dubbed the 12-day war, akin to the 6-day war. and it's being hailed as one of history's greatest military operations. The IDF was able to take control of Iran's skies in just 2 days, and after achieving operational freedom was able to target the regime's most vital military and nuclear assets. Not to mention the historic decision by U.S. President Donald Trump to order the use of the bunker buster bombs by the United States to completely destroy Iran's nuclear program, hitting the sites in Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Now, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have both expressed the success of the operation and assert that this has set Iran's nuclear program back years. But despite the overwhelming success, the war has come at a cost for Israel. Joining us now with more on the price of this war is Professor Zvi Eckstein, head of the Allen Institute for Economic Policy at Reichman University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's jump into it. Of course, we have the loss of 28 people in Israel during the course of this war. This alone, represents a heavy price. But I want to talk to you today about the financial aspect. And, it's a simple question, but I'm sure it has a very complex answer. How much did this war cost the state of Israel?
Well, the cost is approximated, just the war, just the army cost, about 20 billion shekels, which is about $6.5 billion. And most of the cost is about the anti-missile defense activity. And then also the missiles and the ammunition of the airplanes who came there, and all the other activities. That's the sort of overall approximation that has been done by both the army and the Ministry of Finance. In terms of the civilian cost, this come out to something to 8 to 9 billion shekels. So that's close to $3 billion. And basically, it's both the housing and the compensation for the housing. And also, they would have to be in rental for a few years until their apartments would be rebuilt. So that's relatively to the cost of the war in Gaza is relatively small. It's also a bit much smaller than what we expected before the war. We thought it would be longer and there would be even more missiles coming from Iran. We have about 550 missiles coming in, and then the ammunition supported it. By the way, the cost would be spread over more than 1 year because it's mainly rebuilding the possibility of having this anti-missile, the Hetz 1, Hetz 2, 3, and all the other things around the defense activities to protect Israeli from the drones, which was extremely successful.
And you mentioned also the war in Gaza. Do you have figures on how much the war has cost Israel? The war in Gaza has cost Israel to this day. We're on day 632 of the war.
Yes, the direct military cost of this war is a range of 150 billion shekels, much more expensive. And then on top of this, rebuilding the north, rebuilding the south, compensating the north and the south families. Also, the cost of taking care of all the wounded people, all the died people, etc. We are reaching a cost of around 300 to 350 billion shekels. A lot of this has to be paid upfront, but some would be spread over the future. That has been a very costly war, and unfortunately, this war has not been over, and we still have about 50 hostages. 20 of them are probably alive, and that would require additional compensation and taking care of them, including the psychological and all the medical aspects, which are very important.
Of course. And, I want to ask, what are the ramifications, or what is the impact for Israel's economy for all this, nearly 2 years of war?
The way we finance wars, like all countries have been financed wars, is we usually, the government issue debt and the public buy the debt. Our debt has increased substantially. We usually measure it as a percentage of the GDP, gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is about 2 trillion shekels. It was about 60% of 2 trillion shekels before the war, and it reached about 68% by the end of 24. And we expect that what would go on is that by the end of this year, it will reach around 70%. In fact, below the cost of maintaining public support for the corona, which actually moved the Israeli debt from 60% of GDP to 72% of GDP. The key question is how we will pay for that, and the key way to pay for this is to economy to grow. Israel is a potential growth of 3.5% to 4%, and if we are able to grow at this level after the war, hopefully the war would be finished before the end of this year, as Trump is saying, and everyone is saying that we will end the war in Gaza and get all the hostages back. Then we expect in 3-4 years we will grow faster, as usually after wars. People get back to work, independent, people who have their own restaurants and their own business, and also corporations are getting back to normality. And we expect that if we get successful at the end, also with Gaza, as we have been with Iran and also with the Hezbollah. And with Iran, it has not been finished because the key question is what would be the future of the nuclear attempts they try to build. That's a very important aspect. And also with Gaza, it's a big question about what kind of military we need in order to protect Israel for future potential Hamas. And hopefully we end up there with the Hamas has no military power at all to attack Israel again. But overall, strategically, what we can say and what we hear from generals and from the US, and including the US involvement with the anti-nuclear attempt, Israel is strategically in a better position. Hopefully, we won't get any sanctions from Europe, and then the export will continue to grow, which is a big engine, especially the high-tech sector. So we are very...
I want to ask you, because you mentioned the high-tech sector, and I wanted to ask you specifically about that. That is one of the main engines of Israel's economic growth, at least in recent years. We've seen a tremendous number of incredible exits from Israeli high-tech in the past several years. And of course, many investments coming in from abroad into Israeli high-tech. Now, has this suffered significantly during the war? And could this perhaps, high-tech is a very competitive industry. Israel is, of course, among the leaders in the world, but it's, a very dynamic industry, and things can change in an instant. And so, money and investments can leave Israel and go elsewhere. And so do you foresee a situation like that, where some of the money that was coming into Israel will no longer be coming back into Israel because of the security situation, because people may think that it's simply not worth doing business in Israel when you can do business elsewhere?
Yep, the main reason business come to Israel is because of the high quality labor force. And as long as the labor force stays in Israel and getting out of the high-tech sector labor force, there are twice as many on reserves than others. But they are coming back, and then the investment is about the people, the R&D, the innovative activity, the cyber activity, and the defense activity. The defense is part of our high-tech. So when you look at the whole high-tech on the R&D activity by international corporations like Google and Intel and Meta, etc., that has not been reduced. Also, the growing up companies that like Wix and others that did exits and etc. So those companies who are making profits in the defense industry, those are working well, and they succeed to export as the same level during the war. The main area that has been slowed down a bit is the startups. Still, the outside money coming to the Israeli startups is substantial. It's focused on certain fields, in particular, as I say, the cyber and others. So the key question is, what would be the risk in investing in Israel? And what we see in the international markets is that the risk of Israel has been going down after the Iranian war. There is this asset which called the credit default swap, which basically how you insure Israeli debt. And the price for that was about $1.50 before the Iranian war, and it went down to $1.20 now, and probably will go even lower as the Iranian potential nuclear has been really destroyed, as the army and President Trump and others were saying for many years, and also has been proved that if it will come back and they try to get it back, Israel has the capacity to basically delay it and actually to destroy a large part of it.
All right, so a lot of potential for the Israeli economy, potential for growth after the war with Iran, and a potential ceasefire with Gaza. Professor Tzvi Eckstein, thank you so much for joining and for your insights today.
Thank you.
And in the meantime, the war in Gaza continues. It's day 632 of the war. And IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir says the IDF offensive will soon reach the lines set by the government. Zamir said that the heavy blow to Iran and the IDF's offensive will soon see the army assert control over 75% of the Gaza territory. Zamir is reportedly planning to tell the cabinet today that the military plan in Gaza has run its course. And analysts say that by declaring the army was in sight of its goals, Zamir is signaling to the government the need to decide whether to move forward with a hostage ceasefire deal or prepare for the IDF to establish military rule in Gaza. And meanwhile, the war goes on both above and below ground. Today, the IDF issued evacuation orders in Gaza City after an earlier order in central Gaza after a rocket was fired at Israel. The army said it plans to employ extensive firepower to destroy terrorist capabilities in the areas and will attack any area used for launching rockets or rebuilding Hamas capabilities. And over the weekend, the army and Shin Bet announced the elimination of Mohamed al-Issa, a founding member of Hamas and a key architect of the October 7th massacre, and one of the last senior Hamas members still alive. The IDF says al-Issa was killed in the area of Sabra in Gaza. So joining us now with more on the war in Gaza is Major in the Reserves Elliot Chodoff, a military analyst. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, we heard earlier from the IDF spokesman, but as a military analyst, I want to ask you as well and hear your take. Has Israel really reached its war goals in Gaza?
It hasn't reached the war goals yet. It's approaching them, but defining them is a bit of an issue here. Obviously, getting the release of the hostages is one of the major objectives. The destruction of Hamas's military capabilities has been either reached or is very close to being reached. But we have to keep in mind that the consequence of destroying their military capabilities has meant that they have now fragmented into a guerrilla/terrorist organization. They were always a terrorist organization, but they've moved now to guerrilla warfare, much more decentralized, where their overall capability has been reduced. But as we've seen even in this past week, their micro capability of inflicting losses and damage remains. So it's not the Hamas of October 7th, but it may be the Hamas of the 1990s, which was a danger in its own right, just of a different scale and a different nature.
As a security expert, what in your view is the best possible outcome for Israel's security in terms of who will rule Gaza the day after the war, the day after the ceasefire is announced?
The best outcome is any outside force that's willing to take over a strong administration. In other words, preventing Hamas from reestablishing its what's called the civilian control, the administrative control, from which they were able to draw enormous resources from the population over the past 15, now almost 20 years, whether it's manpower, other resources, real estate resources, underground resources. That needs to be prevented initially on an administrative level. And the other thing that's important with this is either coordination with Israel, with the security services, particularly the IDF, or some sort of articulation of the idea of what we're doing now with Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is a zero tolerance policy from the Israeli side, saying anytime something comes up that the administration, here again, I use the Lebanese example, the Lebanese government, the Lebanese army, whatever administration would be in Gaza, is either unwilling or incapable of stopping, we're going to go in and deal with it, whether it's by an airstrike, artillery, raid, or whatever, but not to allow Hamas even incrementally to regain any sort of power or control in the Strip.
So as you mentioned, there are reports that several Arab countries, including perhaps Egypt, may play a role in ruling Gaza after the war. I mean, do you see any potential danger, any potential threat in this, specifically from, say, Egypt gaining a foothold in Gaza?
Every outcome here has a potential threat of one type or another. Israeli control carries the threat of an insurgency going endlessly against our forces and our administration. An Arab force in there, certainly a threat of potential future conflict, potential future threats by that force, or some sort of collaboration. And we know very well that Egypt was not exactly, how can I put this, clean-handed over the years in terms of Hamas's building and its tunnels and so on and so forth. Qatar, certainly, with all due respect to its connection to the United States, the funder and backer, a Wahhabi government that is ideologically in line with Hamas. So there's always a threat. A Palestinian Authority, we've been there and done that, and it didn't work all that well either. So there's no perfect solution. The question is, first, what are the minimum threats to Israel? And second, I think even more important, is how does Israel prepare the response to if any of those threats becomes an actual reality, thinking in advance what that particular threat would be and preparing for it if and when it comes to pass.
And I want to ask also, on the horizon is peace with Syria. But can Israel truly agree to peace when the situation is so volatile within the country, when there are so many unknowns about the future of Syria?
I think peace is overstating it. I think it would have to start with some sort of normalization, still not paying a particularly high price for it. Now, Jolani Ashara, however you want to name him, is talking about an Israeli return to the 1974 ceasefire separation of forces line, which is what Israel moved out of with the fall of Assad and taking an additional belt in Syrian territory. I think that's an opening line. It's an opening negotiation. Once again, it is an unstable country. There are all sorts of reports, and I take them all with a grain of salt because I don't think anybody really knows what's going on inside of these countries, that the Ashara regime could possibly fall. They still have a lot of work to do to stabilize. So
Major
some sort of
Elliot,
normalization.
Chodoff, I have to stop you there because we are just about out of time, but I want to thank you so much for your analysis and for joining us today.
My pleasure.